Hey everyone, and welcome to this webinar on the 5 steps to help recession-proof your finance technology stack. I'm Jerry Harridan, and I will be your moderator today. I am joined by David Apple, the Sage Global Head for Subscription in the SaaS vertical, Matt Urbizo, a partner in audit for Cherry Beckert, and John Bart, a Strategic Alliances Director for Cherry Beckert. Welcome all.
Thanks, Jerry.
So, David, what are the typical challenges SaaS-based companies face, and how do they prioritize addressing each one?
Yeah, well, first off, thank you, Jerry, and everybody for having me. And for all of you listening, we spent a lot of time in the green room talking about putting ourselves in your shoes. And I'm very fortunate my organizations have helped 5,000 of your peers go through all this. And what we're about to share is the pattern that's been learned from what your peers have gone through. So you don't have to learn it the hard way for yourselves, but you can follow the trail that's been broken for great success that's come out of all this stuff. And we're finance folks. We like process and compliance and controls. So we put this in 5 straightforward steps that you can act on, that they all build on top of one another. The first one is, and Jerry, and we got a lot more detail that Matt, John, and I are going to go through, but the first one is, where are you at in your growth life cycle? Because then that determines what processes you should be maturing. And then when you know that, there's certain expectations, the executive team, your internal business owners around you, the board wants to see, and that guides you into how the tech stack should be. And then start with how you're generating money to differentiate yourself with your billing use case, but each of them drives a different nuance. And then there's an ecosystem around you of other departments that need to tie into finances, trying to track cash coming in and out, how those integrations go. And then last but not least, because you always want to begin with the end in mind, is what is it that you need to track and the small number of most critical KPIs that are driving the business? And then how do you forecast out what those are, particularly in today's economy, with where those are going? So these all build on top of one another that way, Jerry.
David, that's great. And everyone, I'm excited to be here today too. As the audit partner in the group, I have the privilege and the fun to partner with the greatest, most fast-growing technology companies in the Southeast. So I get to see a lot. I get to see best practices. I get to see the good, the bad, the ugly, and ultimately I get to see those huge winning exits. And with that, I have learned a lot along the way. And I'm going to add a little bit of perspective today on what I get to see at companies real time and how this intersects with building your tech stack and having the right system in place to support your growth. I would say some of those typical challenges that I'm currently seeing with SaaS-based companies are things like margins, understanding your margins on your products, which leads into your pricing strategy to support your revenue growth. Second big one, and this is definitely, kind of welcoming to 2022, 2023, capital efficiency. Money is not as cheap and as easy to come by as it was in 2020, 2021. And having the right data and understanding your spend and your ROI is just a tremendous challenge right now. And then finally, just infrastructure, accessing the right data, preparing for capital raises, and ultimately, your successful exit.
Thanks, Matt. As Jerry mentioned, I'm the Strategic Alliance Director at Cherry Beckert, and that's for Sage Intacct. So I see Sage Intacct when I'm talking to a customer about how to utilize the software and apply it to what Dave was speaking to. And I'm going to add some color commentary from what I see interacting with clients and piggyback a little bit on what Matt says.
All right, well, I'm looking forward to this color commentary by each one of you. And let's go ahead and look at step 1, which is the process maturity life cycle. David, what is the process maturity life cycle?
Well, for each of you, I want you to see yourself in all this. We start in the left-hand column. You start from the smallest and build your way up as we go. Seed, what you're trying to do is CEO and the developers build a product with good product market fit. Get 10 happy customers. Finance is as simple as managing cash and the payroll. But then Series A, you want to prove you can sell what it is you just created, showing the growth rate. And the processes that start to get automated is cash flow and billing, because you want to get your arms around that. Series B, prove you can expand by selling to customers a second and third time. Finance has to deal with a lot here. If you're there, or you've gone through it before, you know this. There's contract amendments. All those impact revenue recognition. As the complexity is increasing, the close can get more burly. And then you want to be able to, as all this is happening, still forecast what's going into the future. Then Series C to F, this is the backdrop. You're fighting and sharp elbowing with your competition in the marketplace. Hopefully you win your market. And what now investors are looking for is to make it predictable, profitable, and repeatable. And so finance has a lot more focus on FP&A and budget versus actuals, as Matt said, about growth, efficiency, growth, and then efficiency right now is the broader backdrop of what investors are looking for right now. And then keep those customers, because a dollar from an upsell of a customer is so much more profitable than a new dollar in customer acquisition. And then just not the final milestone, but for this purpose of the slide, just the latest sale or IPOs, you had a capital efficient product, and now you're moving to adjacent markets and geographies. And you might have done some M&A and international before. In compliance, you need to do all those as you grow, but now you have to have it very dialed in, so the number you say to Wall Street is the number you deliver against. And so what I ask each of you to do is to ask yourself where you're at in this, both in the funding stage and the life cycle stage, and then what is it you need to accomplish? Because then we're going to talk to each of those as we go through the next 5 steps. But Matt, John, if you want to build on it from there, or Jerry, we just move on to step 2.
I'll jump in. When I'm talking to clients in the sales process, it's generally in the Series A process. Sometimes if they're forward thinking and they want to tackle all the issues you see in this chart, they'll do a complete upgrade. They'll move off of something as typically QuickBooks that they've outgrown, and they'll implement these processes to get to a level of, say, a B or a C. Sometimes customers say that's too much change. It's too much disruption. Can we do it in a stage process, which will accommodate too? And sometimes people will wait too long, and then it's a very difficult transition if they get into the latter stages here. Matt, what do you typically see in your engagements?
Yeah, I would reinforce that, John. I think that, as our clients are moving through their business life cycle, a lot of this is coming at them very fast. There's a lot of growth in there, and sometimes it's intersecting. When's the right time to upgrade our ERP system? When's the right time to, automate some processes? Have actual data supporting the decisions we're making, giving our information to our sales teams to go out to market and be equipped to close new deals. And oftentimes it can come too late. And when I say that it comes too late, you can get caught up in always having to go out and raise money. You could be working on the next big customer implementation, and before you know it, you need this, but the moment's passed you by. And so I think a lot of the things that you and Dave have highlighted are a reality when I see this in practice out with my clients.
Okay, thanks, Matt. So you're up next, and what we're going to look at now is the tech stack checklist. Matt, do you see subscription billing and revenue recognition managed properly by many small companies? Or maybe a better way to ask this is, do you see proper processes in use generally?
That's a great question, Jerry. I would say that most earlier stage companies, so seed, especially into Series A, maybe some Series B, don't typically have a strong grasp on revenue recognition or billing best practices. As you're kind of living and dying by ARR growth. And there can often be a grow at all costs mentality, which can result in just a significant diversity in contract terms, special terms, customer profiles, different market verticals, and the like. So I do see companies experiencing data entry errors, delays in their financial close, extended DSOs, and I mean, even see missed billings sometimes. We're testing contracts, we're testing billings, accounts receivable, deferred revenue, and we see incorrect amounts billed or just missed bills altogether. We also often see sales tax missed or potentially billed at the incorrect rates. Invoices going to the wrong places, right? You can't get paid unless, your billing process is set up to where it's efficient, it's being timely billed in accordance with your contract, it's going to the right place in the right format, and accelerating your cash flows. I think kind of my takeaway here is QuickBooks is very friendly to SMB. So you have QuickBooks and you start adding all these different applications to that tech stack to do different functions that you need. And it's just one kind of quick solution at a time. But this seems to be putting a heavy reliance on manual processes and Excel tracking, which results in some of the challenges that I do see.
I see all those as well when we're selling and implementing. It's very difficult to keep track of all your revenue recognition in a spreadsheet. And I do see misbilling. We'll see where they're not 606 compliant, so they won't amortize their expenses that are associated with the contract. Numerous things, they don't do MEAs, correct, multi-element arrangements, where they're discounting and bundling, but not recognizing that correctly. So, and that's where we can help. That's bread and butter inside the application and our knowledge. But David, what do you see too across the wide Sage Intacct customer base?
Well, yeah, because we built this for you again to make this formulaic, as steps 1 through 6 on this one is knowing again what your billing model is. You can set what your chart of accounts needs to look like and build your GL, because that's the foundation of the house that you're doing. And the billing use case, and then the downstream, the rev rec that comes from that, because you high volume or you high ACV, how many contract amendments do you have coming from, and then being thoughtful where your data is coming from, obviously from the financial system, but you've got extensions of other applications around you. And then the big killer, when I get pulled into escalations on deployments from your peers, the number one issue I found what happens is there's some exceptions to the selling process, because a procurement team wrapped your sales team into a pretzel and they close the contract and they throw it across to you, and your systems aren't built in order to handle and accommodate those exceptions. And sometimes you got to do that. But my goodness, let me just tell you as a pro tip, work really hard with your CRO to try to put processes in place that allow you to handle and absorb those without having to accommodate too much of them, because that's where things can really get off the track in the compliance. And to Matt and John's point, when you're smart and you know what it is you have to do, it's that, as my father said, growing up in the Midwest, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. The more you can stay a step ahead of planning for these, knowing that the competitive dynamics change, capital markets are changing, so some things are out of your control. But the more you can plan for these and be thoughtful about them, the better off you're going to be able to build things and then have a more fluid workflows, and then be able to better manage cash in the forecast.
Well, thanks for that. David, you started talking a little bit about the billing use case. Matt, I want to get you to elaborate on this. So how often do you see a need for complex billing scenarios, and does the lack of a system and automated processes inhibit growth?
Jerry, that's a good question. I think that billing scenarios are often not very complex at the early stage of the business life cycle, but they become progressively so as you get into Series B, Series C, Series D. You get some of those different types of go-to-market strategies, different products and services being sold, different maybe target customers or industries you're selling into that require certain terms or contract formats. So it's definitely gets more complex with growth. But in those earlier stages, I would say there's also just more voluminous billing in nature, which can become tedious and time consuming for manual labor, right? And sometimes there's situations with variable consideration, complex contracts where you're having to true up what you bill. So I would just say to some of the things that David was just talking about, we want growth. We want our clients to growth. Growth is, it's growth in sales is the blood of a company, right? It's the lifeblood. And so accounting and finance doesn't ever need to be, one term I love when I hear it is a sales prevention department. It just needs to be equipped with the process, technology, and infrastructure to be a good partner to the growth side of the organization. And so when we start seeing things like maybe bundling of services, for example, training, implementation, subscription fees, it's all priced as one thing. Well, how do you start pulling that apart? What gets billed on the renewal? What doesn't, right? I would say oftentimes these GAAP accounting implications are rarely considered when you're doing a deal. And it may not affect contracted ARR or recurring cash flows, but a sophisticated buyer or investor is going to want to understand the application of GAAP. What's recurring? What are the margins by these different types of services being bundled? And this is where some of the billing use case that David was starting to get into becomes very, very relevant.
Yeah, I see that as well. And of course, it's very hard to resist the opportunity to make a sale in those early stages. You want to accommodate the customer. But I'll stick up for the accounting department too, because it gets thrown over the wall to them and they're trying to figure it out. And there's never really a cost assigned. What does it take to manage the type of scenarios, and how do we do it correctly, and how do we prevent errors or misbilling, as you mentioned earlier, Matt, and then be compliant on top of it.
John's in your corner, folks. We're all in your corner. If you haven't gone through this yet, you will. And I'll just say about this slide, we made it complex for a reason, that there's a lot of decisions to be made. Early on, as Matt said, you can be simple and straightforward, but it grows as you make acquisitions, as your customer gets more sophisticated, as more upsells come on. And so you just want to be thoughtful. This isn't, while there's these 6 questions here, it's not complete. And there's we've got we call it the ultimate subscription billing checklist that's out there. You can just Google for that and it'll help guide you through. Search for Sage and the ultimate subscription billing subscription billing checklist, and you'll find it. But just be thoughtful about it. And finance, don't do it in a vacuum. Do it in conjunction with the product team. Do it in conjunction with the sales team, the customer success team. So you're all on the same page as how you're bringing value and then monetizing, but then driving the capital flow of the business.
And I'll add a pro tip to David. It's try not to do it in a system implementation. Be thoughtful and try to define those ahead of time.
That's why we're doing this webinar for all of you, to take the time to figure that out, because there's too much pressure when you've got delivery timelines. You're better off planning ahead of time.
So I did hear the word compliance a couple of different times. Matt, are clients generally ASC 606 compliant?
It can be hit or miss. It depends on how complex their product and service offerings are. So sometimes I think you may just get a little bit lucky. Other times, you've built something that's really innovative and changing the game. GAAP is often not applied. And so I would say, I'd guess that going through a first-time audit, never been audited before, I would say 2/3 of the time clients are generally not ASC 606 compliant. And I'm going to give you some examples of the big ones that we see that without a proper revenue recognition module kind of tied to your billing could become a challenge. One is a lack of processes on when new customers are gaining access to the SaaS platform and tying that to commencing revenue recognition. It's nice to say, oh, we signed a new deal and let's go ahead and bill the first annual subscription fee up front and start revenue recognition, but that's not what GAAP would say should be done in that instance. Another one is just, due to discounted or free performance obligations, in which no aspect of the contract consideration is being allocated to those obligations. So you say, hey, we're not going to charge to do implementation for you. That's great. We all have been taught growing up, there's no such thing as a free lunch. Same thing applies to GAAP. You need some processes and some infrastructure to be able to account for that. And then, our upfront services, when you implement or set up, are they truly distinct from the ongoing SaaS? Does it add benefit to the customer, or is it essential for them to even use the SaaS platform? All these have implications to GAAP revenue recognition. And don't even get me going on the cost side of it, because GAAP has made it even more complicated with, costs incurred to obtain a contract, to fulfill a contract, application development of your internal use software to generate your revenue. I mean, it goes deep and it gets more and more complex. So I would say, that Series C, Series A, maybe even Series B wrestles with a lot of this stuff.
Well, it's part of this, and why we've got this slide up here is how you're thinking about your systems. So for all of you, we're trying to help you again be thoughtful and have you avoid pitfalls peers have fallen into before. If you don't mind going back just one on the build. When most folks start thinking about solving all this, you're just solving one fire at a time. One place of process manual isn't working anymore, and so you want to automate it. But when you think of things as individual components, what it leaves you is this data mess. It's because the more integrations you got, the more wasted time you put out there. And then you've also got a lack of a system of record, because that's what Matt was talking about, is when most people fail the audit because they haven't thought about things. They're not fail, but realize the audit catches things that they want to put in place. Because you want to be thoughtful upon how your contracts are coming in based upon the billing model, and then how you're doing all the downstream accounting about it. And so the more you can do it in a platform instead of in individual components, the more you're going to be able to be automated and be strategic in your decision making.
And I agree with that, David, and I see that, and especially when there's multiple systems involved, really how you go about the integrations, how you define those. And from an IT perspective, we would call that a IT architecture, and then you'd have your system architecture integrations. I realize that's a big lift for the smaller companies in those lower stages, but just be mindful of the amount of integrations and the amount of processes that are involved, and have a sense of where you're going to go, some level of a roadmap, so you don't get into this tangled mess in the short run or the long run.
Yeah, and to build on that, a lot of this goes back to, just efficiencies, right? And what's the best way to get efficiency? Is it to add another very specific application to your tech stack, or is it to look at a way to pull all of this together into one solution?
This is a list of all the many amazing partners that we have that each service different kind of processes that you might want to go deeper on. And this is not a complete list, but it's certainly a list of firms that we think a lot of that we've chosen to partner do integrations with. But for you, as you are listeners, you're planning all this, take this into account, work with the process owners of these that are your peers in the business, because realize all this is coming into the tech stack, because data is the new oil on having all that information in there, which is, we're not at the fifth point yet, but we're going to our fifth step, which is how you report and forecast. And that's all the data that's coming from these systems. And again, I want to stress Matt's point, which is a thought, and John's point, that a thoughtful approach on all this avoids a lot of headache later on, because these do exist in your platform. But be mindful about them.
Okay, great. Thanks, everyone. So let's dive a little bit deeper into step 4 and integrations. John, I'm going to start with you. So how much efficiency is lost without having your core systems integrated, such as CRM, billing, ERP, et cetera? And what are the common issues as a result?
So a couple of things there, Jerry. It depends on the complexity of the process and the amount of data and the frequency. So I always ask the client to do a mini business case or look at the cost benefit. So let's just take an example of payroll. If you only process payroll once a month and you've got a small number of employees, it's very easy to upload a CSV file into Intact and you're done. But if you're doing multiple payroll runs weekly, now it's consuming your accounting staff's time. Then you do an assessment of, is the integration worth the time? And a number of these integrations have built-in integrations, so it can be automatic for you. And it can, you again use the payroll side of it. It can update employees between the systems in addition to all the payroll. And just a little plug here, ADP on there is also an integrated partner. So it's part of the Intact part of the system itself. So there's even integration and to that level of detail. And that applies elsewhere. Salesforce is another example where the integration is already built into the core software on the Intact side. But just keep in mind about time savings and then also if you're doing data entry, the risk of error.
Yeah, I think the build on to what John's noting about integrations, right? If you're not integrating, what does that mean, right? It's an increased business risk with an over-reliance on the knowledge of human resources. You know, you have the great reshuffling that we experienced during the pandemic and so many people changing jobs, and without having that core system to integrate this diverse tech stack and to automate what can be done and to just take that over reliance on manual process and human resources out of the equation, it's going to result in either opportunities obtained or opportunities missed. And you can see as a growing company, you can Series C, Series D, and just how diverse your tech stack can be. Those manual processes can be crippling. I mean, you want your accounting and finance and operations team supporting revenue growth, not updating Excel spreadsheets all day, every day.
Yeah, you're hearing it from two very deep practitioners. John assists many of your peers with implementing. Matt evaluates the results of what many of your peers are going through. This is very wise, no pun intended, sage counsel that you're hearing about, being thoughtful about it. But for all of you, again, the simple takeaway here is consider what other departments have done today, their own process maturity, text life cycle, and incorporate that into what your tech stack looks like. And the less integrations, the better.
Okay, so now let's go ahead and move on to step 5, report and forecast. So the question is, do the clients typically have forward visibility to their cash flow with manual processes? And Matt, I'm going to ask you that.
It's something that we look at a lot in audits, when it comes to the going concern presumption, and is there enough liquidity in the business to satisfy obligations, meet working capital requirements. And I would say that our clients have incredibly smart people in these accounting and finance roles, and they do have a great sense of where cash flow is, especially on the short term. The challenge is it's typically tracked in an Excel spreadsheet, and there's a lot of just manual communications with different departments to just stay on top and update the assumptions, and for payroll counts, vendor payments, onboarding different solutions that you may be integrating into your product solution. And so, I think there's a high level sense of what's coming down the pipeline on the short term, but when it gets into longer term strategic planning, how much capital should we raise? These become much more challenging answers or questions to answer without putting in some type of solution to help give that visibility.
Yeah, I would add to it again on the Sage side, Sage Intacct side, they put a lot of time and effort into the reporting. They want the CFO and his or her team to have visibility to make forward-thinking decisions. So this dashboard is much more than a dashboard. There's a whole engine behind this. It's just the dashboard is the presentation layer. And this is just an example of the SaaS metrics that you can get and move yourself into more of a strategic CFO as opposed to a reporting CFO. Sorry, those are kind of cliche terms, but they're true.
Begin with the end in mind. What's the product that you're building, and what's the unique value that you're bringing to your clients, and what's the story that's underneath that? And then what's the small number of measures that show the success and track record of how you're doing against telling that story via selling a great product? And so the measures that we put out here in this dashboard, you ultimately, if you choose to become our client, which we'd love to do, this is configurable. by you. And Cherry Baker, it's an amazing firm. John and his extended team, the ability to be able to do this, to say, this is what's unique about us. Here's where our data is coming from. Here's what we want to present. But the issue that I hear time and time again is when you do this in a spreadsheet, there's always a risk of error. It's always late. Back to that gorp we showed on the spaghetti mess in the step 4 is where's the data coming from? And are you looking at one true system of record? Because this is the nirvana. This is how you decide if you're going to give your CMO extra money in order to fund a marketing event. This is how you see, is a new acquisition working out? This is how you see, are we doing a good enough job with our customer retention based upon how the last product release was meant to address the top issues and the customers and the churn risk that you have. And so those are just 3 sample questions of the myriad of questions that you can get. But picture for yourself, if you have this real time, how much more effective you'd be in your decision making. And then also, for my many customer interviews, talking to many of your peers, I ask, what's the least favorite part of your job? And the answer always is being manual, because being manual stops me from being strategic. So if you put in these 5 steps, that's what allows you to be strategic and interpret this data to be a great partner to the business owners by having them have this kind of information for decision making.
Well, thanks for that, David. And so as we look at some of these metrics, I'm just curious, so what are the typical SaaS metrics that are necessary to operationally run the business and report to the investors, management, and board? Are there any that just stand out?
Yeah, I'd be happy to speak to this, Jerry. I think some of the obvious ones are obviously contracted ARR, ARR per customer, total contract value. These businesses are valued based off of these metrics, right? Typically some type of multiple of contracted ARR. Then it gets into margins, churn, upsells, and then what's been talked about more and more recently is your cost side of things, right? A lot of times you might have an army of engineers and kind of flow all into research and development, or maybe you're capitalizing some of the software builds. But what are your costs to implement your solution? What are your costs to support your customers? More importantly, what's the cost to maintain this solution and keeping it working the way that it should for your customers? And these are things that not only you need this to make strategic decisions to run your business, but this is what your board wants to know. This is what your investors want to know. And quite frankly, they expect you to know it off the top of your head. And if you're trying to figure it out, every month on a manual basis, you're not going to be prepared to do that. So that's my perspective from what I get to see and work with on my clients on a daily basis.
Okay, and finally, under report and forecast, how are budget versus actuals, along with profitability in smaller firms, done efficiently and accurately? And Matt, I'm going to ask you this too.
I think that typically the technological infrastructure and process is not always in place, but I mean, when you look at the slide we have here, you can start seeing now some of these metrics we're talking about, getting the budget, headcounts, your payroll, your bookings, OpEx, right? You can see trends, you can see breakdowns. I mean, this is real-time information that's not being done manually. If resources are going to continually be piled into product development and sales and go-to-market strategy, well, they're looking to you. Outside of just being an auditor, I've also been a controller and I've been an FP&A before, and people come to you on a daily basis for the answers. What are the answers? CFO, controller, VP of finance, head of FP&A, like, tell me what I need to know to go to market. How do we go about this? And I think that, the only way to really do this is to have the right solution in place. And to the extent you put that off, it does come with an opportunity cost.
All right, well, thanks for that, Matt. So that will do it for today. But before I close, I'm just going to ask, does anyone have any parting words?
I would say to add to that is hopefully this helps you from our experiences. And if you'd like to discuss it with us, please reach out. We'll provide contact information.
I wanted to, Matt, please, and I had a wrap-up thought.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, look, we love our clients. We're lucky to work with them. We're always looking for more clients that we can help. And like, it's just about being helpful. We're available. Reach out, shoot us an email, send a LinkedIn message, text me. I don't care. Let's hop on the phone and let's just bounce things off of each other, and let's make good connections, good, helpful connections. And hopefully some of this has been thought-provoking today and leads you down a path to to execute and achieve your goals.
I want to share, thank you for all of you for spending the time with us. There's this old phrase that people gravitate towards competency. And what we really wanted to show is each of us, because we all play off each other, coming together to support you, is to feel the competency of understanding what the challenges you have in front of you and trying to break it down into these 5 steps to act upon and make it very practical and tactical and tangible and actionable for you as you go through all this. As the last couple of screens, as Matt and Jerry were talking, were just screenshots to show you what's possible when you put the 5 steps in place. Then you've got the reporting infrastructure to report, show that cohorts, show your budget versus actuals. And I want to put this one as the final point here before there's a couple more screenshots and then the wrap-up slide. But we've got the ability for you to start really simple. If you remember the process maturity lifecycle and how John said a lot of it's Series A and the starter firms to get started with us, we've got something with the capacity and capability and the minimal amount of time for you to be able to handle and put in. But as you go through all those growth layers, all this capability and functionality to help you go through that all in one platform. So it gives you that amazing reporting infrastructure that you got in all this. It's been my pleasure to be part of this today. Hope all this was helpful for you. And Jerry, I know there's here's the wrap-up slide. I'll turn it back over to you.
Okay, thanks, David. And I would like to thank our panelists again for joining us today. The conversation was fantastic. And also I would like to thank the viewers for tuning in, and hope you found this information very beneficial. I certainly did. We would love to help you on your Sage Intacct journey, as Matt mentioned. So feel free to reach out and we'll be in touch soon. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.